Mm.
Okay, so what we might actually do is see if we can come back as a group, because that didn't let us get in there. And if anyone could just start to give us an idea as to who you believe would be your client, and if you could just give us some input as to what you think that the profile would be. Yes, Cass?
So I think I'm on the right track here. So I'm going to say people with disabilities that experience domestic violence. Am I?
Absolutely. It is one of the main vulnerable groups.
Because they're some people are more isolated to their homes. They don't get out as much. And it's more of a frustrating, I guess, environment for some people.
Yeah, you're spot
Like
on.
a confronting situation. Yeah.
And Karen, what have you got to give us input for who we may be working with?
From a legal perspective, victims of crime, children in the domestic violence cases, there are support workers who are able to provide assistance to the witness whilst they're giving their evidence. That's great. They can't say anything, they can sit there. And if a witness is breaking down and losing the plot, which often happens, they can kind of interrupt and ask to go off screen. I don't know if that's the same in other states, but New South Wales, all victims give their evidence via a remote witness room.
Okay.
So they never have to actually face the court or be in the court.
So you may be working in the courts with the criminal system. Absolutely. Sib, what have you got for us?
So I currently have a client who is 21. She has a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I've had her for about a month and my head has just been whirring, going, hang on a minute, I've got to get my head around this. I figured out that she was raised in the system. There was lots of domestic violence as she was growing up from her mother and many fathers, mainly her mother. And so her current partner is the father of her second child. So she's in rural because I'm in rural. She's a young mum. I have gotten Act for Kids involved, who are an absolute blessing. And because she doesn't know how to be a mother. She doesn't know how to connect with her children. And so that could be, if let go, that would, I was seeing child abuse, not in a physical form, but in a not at all connecting with her children, not showing them any love or connection or.
So that was lack of. And so one of the vulnerable groups is known as people with children. And one is women and one is children. So you're all nailing it. Brendan, can you give us some more insight as to who you think you'd be servicing and supporting?
Kids and youth justice, whether it's they're about to go there or after there, as well as people who have kind of grown up with like intergenerational trauma, not just First Nations people, but, for lower social economical backgrounds, passed down from generations. That's what I'd be doing.
And what you're sort of saying, Brendan, is that the young children that Sib's working with now may not have an opportunity to get that health and services and healing. Then they become the youth.
Absolutely. And also they don't know any better in some cases.
They've got no reference point. Well done.
Exactly right. I think that's a really important thing that I saw. Like I was in youth justice when I was quite young. And I came from a great background. And I quickly realized that not only was that life wasn't for me, but some other kids didn't have a choice. They were born into like crime families and stuff. It's on the extensive end, but these kids didn't know any other way. Whereas I was raised the right way and chose to make these decisions. People just grew up around it as well, which was quite
Yeah.
sad and really eye-opening for me personally.
And I think the eye-opening thing that you're saying as well is to think that these individuals have probably possibly maybe never felt safe or trusted in any relationship. So we're in a real privileged position. Abby Rose, sorry, you're next. You had a hand up. I've got a,
First Nations people,
yeah, absolutely.
especially because I just finished that module.
Uh-huh.
For many First Nations people, they're subject to alcohol abuse, which then in turn can result in, I suppose, more aggressive behavior and domestic violence.
Yes. And what we've got to recognize is that the domestic violence happens when we have a significant imbalance of power. And that is unfortunately something that has happened to them and is still happening in some cases. So that's why I'll read you through. These are the statistics of the groups and the people that you'd be likely to be supporting. But it's women. And again, just think of that imbalance of power. Women, children and young people, people with children, aged, disability, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people living in rural, regional, and again, they're isolated. So that makes them a vulnerable person. People affected by substance misuse. So you did just touch on that as well. The LGBTQI and poor literacy skills. So that's because they fall into an imbalance of power. So one thing I'd like to actually just describe now is domestic, what the definition is, so that we know who we'll be working with. The definition of domestic and family violence is violence that occurs within an intimate or family relationship, also called domestic violence, family violence, relationship violence, intimate partner violence, domestic abuse, and child abuse. All of those titles actually come under this. And the abuse type can be financial. It can be also inciting fear, intimidation, stalking, isolation, separation, social, cultural abuse, spiritual abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological, sexual abuse, harm to people, but it also is harmful to pets and property, up to, unfortunately, sadly, domestic homicide. So that is really broad. So we are dealing with mental health support to very vulnerable people. And that is a very big list of possible abuses. And one thing that you all touched on then is that it's ongoing and maybe even right through generations. And people that you will be supporting are not necessarily going to have a reference point of what safety and respect looks like. So what I have found is that we've just discussed the type of person and possibly even the location of the person or the habits with abuse as far as substances. But what I want to just now identify is that the abuse does lead to trauma, which then you have PTSD and then CPTSD if it's gone on for a long time, which means it's over a long period of time and many exposures to many types of abuse. Well, with that big list that we just read, that really falls into a lot of the young children turning in, if they're not getting an opportunity to change the situation, to starting to develop CPTSD. So as mental health support workers, it's probably one of the more complex people to support. I have quite a bit of experience in it. So if anyone wants any assistance with your one-on-one tuition, I have worked with the CPTSD in mental health, in support work amongst this family violence. So I just want to actually ask again around the group, because I'm loving your input. We know now what type of person and probably what social context they're in. But now let's look at how that would present. what type of things would we be actually assisting them with? So I'd love some input. Obviously, I'm just going to throw the first one out there, being anxiety. Can anyone else just start? Yep, Abby, go for it. Tell us, what would we see for these people? Go for it, Abby, and then we'll have Brendan.
They would experience withdrawal.
Yes, yeah, that's great. And Brendan, what else would we be?
Is it what we're providing or what we're seeing?
Pardon?
Is it what we're providing in terms of a
Well,
service, or what we're seeing in the
what we
client?
might see present for them as mental health issues.
Um,
So,
I guess like being afraid to open up or build that rapport.
yeah, so there's
They're
a,
closed off.
yeah, yeah. So we're
Or-
going to possibly see someone, whether it's a child or a youth or Indigenous person, who's going to be withdrawn. So we can then start to identify what this would look like. They're most likely going to have coping mechanisms that may not be so healthy, such as the substance abuse, self-harming, suicide ideation. Yes, Cass?
No, I was going to say that the substance abuse and the self-harm, that was where I was going to go with it.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I'm good listening at
Yeah.
the moment. Thank you.
And now I've got Mary, how do you actually pronounce your name?
You say it as Mary Sheila.
Mary Sheila, what an
Yes.
absolutely beautiful name. I want to change mine straight away.
It's
That's
very
wonderful.
long.
It's beautiful. Mary Sheila, what would you like to say? What presenting symptoms would we be looking at?
So
with
I'm
these-
pointing out to diverse culture and backgrounds.
Yes.
It goes hand in hand with English being a second language.
Yep.
So these people will come in showing fear because it's kind of related to immigrants and all that. So they'll be thinking, if I say this, I might be returned to my country and all this. So
Oh.
fear will be a major thing.
Okay, so about coming out and looking for support and
Yes.
seeking services. So yeah, so we're going to have a fearful client.
Mm.
You're right. So even that second language, how's that going to translate and what would that mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So what we've got to, yes, Cass? I love
So
all these contributions.
people might be unkept,
Oh,
like
perfect.
not well groomed and things
Mhm.
like that, if they're not allowed to
Yes.
indulge in those types of things to make themselves look good.
Yeah, and that's going to
Collaborate.
possibly relate to some self-esteem issues. If you can imagine all of that long list of abuse and then over a long period of time, they're not being shown love. What we're looking at is someone who will definitely have some emotional dysregulation and possibly some poor coping mechanisms. That may show up then as social and learning difficulties, impaired cognitive function, because when we're under stress and fight and flight over a long period of time or even a short period of time, our front part of our actual brain actually shuts down. We don't learn well. That's where you'll start to see the learning difficulties. So what you'll notice is that they'll have maybe poor coping mechanisms, and that's where self-harm comes. One thing I'd like to explain to you is that self-harm actually releases serotonin. So when you actually do cut, which is where you see some very young youth, when the blood platelets come to the wound, your body actually gets a hit of serotonin. So it is actually a way that they're attempting to regulate themselves. Substance abuse is, again, regulation. Their eating disorders, binging and purging actually releases serotonin. So if we can look at this holistically for how we can support someone, they're trying to use undesirable methods to change their brain chemistry. So if they are in fear and fight and flight, one of our biggest, highest priority is to always continue to prioritize their safety. And also in all of our treatments is going to be safety. So did someone just put their hand up and take it away? You all good, Abby? So what I want to do is actually explain to you is that what we've got to look at is ourselves as well. When we're taking on additional stress around someone who's very heightened most of the time, you can have that vicarious trauma when working with these clients. So what I want to discuss is PTSD and CPTSD actually occurs because there's been a reaction in fight and flight, and then you've got a chemical release. The chemicals aren't then released out of the blood. They're released into the bloodstream and they go to your main muscles because you've been told that you're actually unsafe and you need to run. So that's why the brain shuts down, our gut shuts down, and we get flooded with chemicals, adrenaline, and our body is telling us to run. CPTSD and PTSD is unfortunately where that physical discharge of energy didn't move the chemicals out of the bloodstream. And it builds up and builds up and builds up. And that's where you have internal pressure because you are having chemistry that's not getting regulated. So one thing that is needing to be considered in this particular client, it's great to consider relaxation, soothing them because of the fight and flight and the stress load. But in actual fact, having a physical exertion is one way that really needs to happen. You actually have to physically move the adrenaline out of the blood and the muscles to come back to a regulated state. So one thing I got for fun, just to show you, this is how I've always had to remember the client. So I don't know if you've, and even for ourselves, for self-care. So you know yourself if you've got a fizzy drink and you do a little bit of a shake. So let's say you've had an incident at work, an argument, a high stress load, or unfortunately some abusive behavior. You can have a small incident and a small shake up. And what you do is you've got to do that little release. And then, well, that's not little. Anyway, you got to do a little release. Oh, it's not little. And what happens is, thank you, someone gave me a heart. You will release pressure. So then you'll have a shake-up incident in your life, and then you'll release a little bit of pressure. And that's that self-care. And that's what we're going to need to actually, as mental health professionals, is teach them to get their nervous system to know how to feel safe. It's going to be an internal job. What we've got to do is teach them how to release pressure. A small incident, a small release, and do it continuously. Otherwise, as you know, if I let this go, if we get shaken up and we don't release the chemicals, it's actually a physical thing. I'd love you to do some research. We don't release the chemicals and we get shaken up again and again, which is what is happening to this particular client. They are going to actually, we've got the type of client, we've got the symptoms, we've got the behaviors. But what is happening is that they are dysregulated and that pressure is building and building. And we've got to look at physical ways as well to support them to discharge that pressure. So one of the ways that we can do it is by dancing and getting physical. So I do have a song. So if anyone's getting, we're going to go straight to this slide. If anyone's getting very stressed, I've got a really good song and I thought we could stop the recording and I can blast some music and you can turn your screens off and we can have a body and brain break and we can discharge some of the stress. So I'm up for it. I've got a song ready. So put your hand up if anyone needs to or stay back in the break and we can actually get up and move and get some of this stress going. So now, guys, we're on to the values and philosophies. So this is really now what we're going to present for this particular client. And what we've got is we've got safety and well-being is going to be our highest value. And that's what I've just discussed then. We've got to actually let their nervous system as well be able to actually regulate and then release the stress. But the safety and well-being is going to come by when we're with the client. Number one is going to be the environment, which is even why the police stations in Queensland have responded. We need to make sure that when we're with this client, that we're with them in a private space that is free of noise, free of distraction. Now, the under free, the value that what we've got there is actually human rights, which again keeps coming into almost every subject and unit you're doing. And the human rights, I just want to read this to you. This is from the Australian Human Rights Commission. Human rights recognises the inherent value of each person, regardless of background, where they live, what they look like, what they think, or what we believe. They are based on principles of dignity, equality, mutual respect, which is shared across all cultures, religions, and philosophies. So that's the other reason that we are always returning back to that ethical practice of non-discrimination, making sure they've got right to privacy, that we're dealing with kindness, compassion, genuine concern, and giving them autonomy. So under the community, that really just relates to in the values and philosophies that we have got a lot of new attitudes out there in education programs and developments around prevention. You would have seen a lot of TV commercials that they've been doing at different times called Stop It. And we're looking at community-based services. And then now under the values, the unacceptable behaviour, and if we take that human rights into it, it is unacceptable across the board. And that means for all cultures, social, religious, and all beliefs. But they sometimes, for some people, have actually justified it. Many years ago, it was actually considered that it wasn't actually even unlawful for husbands or wives to be abusive to each other. And now there are laws in place, but previously it wasn't. So it was actually acceptable at times. It's now unacceptable. And there is responsibility now in place for all of the behaviours. The value for the needs and rights is, again, the human support side and the human rights. In empowerment, this is now what we're going to do for this particular client is support them to actually take that power back and get that imbalance restored. So we're looking at assisting them after safety. The next most important thing for this particular client is going to be able to take control back for their lives. So we're going to want to restore that particular balance for them. And that will be the main aim of our services. So with it being wide and complex, yes, I think that everyone studying this understands that, which is probably part of the reason you're in the industry. So at the moment in Australia, there's an incident reported to police every 2 minutes. And as we know, not all incidences are reported. So the widespread and complex is crazy as far as numbers. The impacts also, again, the impact on the individual people is that loss of powerness, that power, personal power and autonomy, and the loss of opportunity to actually feel secure, safe and loved. But the impacts here as well, we've got to consider that on the community. So that's where we've got to really value that everyone has an opportunity to feel safe. The devastating effects, unfortunately, there's one woman killed on average and one male per month on average. So it's a woman a week and a male per month by a current former partner. So I guess one thing that I'm curious about now is anybody here tonight considering working directly in this industry? No one's going to go necessarily straight to this industry? Okay. What we've got to consider is that because it is actually so widespread, impacts. Yeah. So the impacts on the value system is one thing we've got to do is that we've also got to make sure, I'll come back to that, Sib, is that we don't impact these particular vulnerable people by our own biases as well, because we've got to make sure that this has an unconditional positive regard at all times. So yes, so I was curious about whether anyone was going to go directly into mental health, into the domestic family violence area. Anyone? Okay, got a couple of comments coming through. So what we've got to do now is go, okay, it's great to know what the principles are, but how are we going to keep them in mind? We're going to follow your organisational policies and procedures, and they will aim to always keep whoever you support safe. Self-reflection, looking back again and just see, like, am I finding myself feeling judgmental? This is really tough because the behaviours they can demonstrate can be ever-changing and quite extreme. And they're multifaceted as well. So you may find it a little bit challenging to know that they go back to their actual abuse. And that I've got notes on coming soon. But that can be a real challenge, because sometimes we can look at things and think, gosh, if I was them, I wouldn't go back for quids. We've really got to create that safety and autonomy and choice and voice for them as well. So we do need to self-reflect with all our clients on a regular basis, but particularly when they're complex clients, because it can sneak in. We've all got families, we've all had relationships. So I think that this would be one of the areas where you might be tested the most. So self-reflection. That can be done also with reviewing. You can review with your supervisors, you can review with your peers. We could all be even reviewing with each other and seeing how our biases actually possibly might come into play. So this is the support processes here. And what we're looking at is, this is the support processes that we had in place at the beginning, where there was a little person that had the wraparound supports. This is about you getting support as well. So this particular page is looking at all of the ways that you could get support. And what they've got noted here is you can get performance feedback. So obviously that's your peers might say, hey, I've noticed this, or you may actually have your actual manager. You can debrief at the end. You can get training and development. And then you've also got supervision. But what I'd like for us to have is a discussion now, and anyone put your hand up, go for it. What other supports can you put in place apart from dancing and getting physical and getting a physical routine, which you're going to need in this industry? I used to have to get the boxing gloves out with some of the CPTSDs, and we would do some boxing, and they were different people, well grounded after a session. I got a bit of a flogging in the park holding up the mitts, but we got basketballs out and we pounded that basketball hoop. We got outdoors. The idea is to find out from that individual what is going to be the best method for them. We got on seesaws, we got on swings, we did so much. So what I'd like to do is just get anyone to give us some ideas for support processes that aren't necessarily these work-based ones. How do you intend? Yes, so we've got, Sib's got a great point. There's employment assistant programs in place, so you can get support straight away. As you know, it's mentioned many times at the beginning of these units that a lot of students do reach out to Lifeline and get study support, emotional support. But can anyone start giving us some of your support practices now? What are you doing to not be that shaken up Coke bottle that then explodes and becomes very dysregulated, because that's just a build-up of pressure? Abby, go for it. I'm loving this.
Journaling.
Oh, yes. Okay. I know that a few of the trainers are very big on that. I think you would have heard Vicky mention many times she'll give herself a number and write down a line and put down some different states of how her day's going. Yep. So you can journal, even just prompt notes, or go long journaling. So Yep. Anyone else into music, into dancing, into footy? Do you kick a ball? What do you do? Or what are you going to do? What support processes? If it's not, go for it, Karen. Give us some ideas.
Oh, I do the crazy dancing around stuff with my dogs.
Oh, with your dogs. Nice.
They enjoy a good dance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time I try and move somewhere, they'll try and block me.
Oh, nice.
Mm.
Yeah. Birth
That's
therapy,
basically-
animal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Animal
And-
therapy. Yeah.
That's also beach therapy as well. So
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Yep. So listen to podcasts we've got, Mel. Getting grounded can often mean get your shoes off. You don't have to go for a run, but you're right. Get to the beach. I like to walk in the water at that low level and actually have that water just lap in and out. Abby, what else have you got for us?
Sometimes when I'm emotionally dysregulated, I'll shake it out of my body, not necessarily dance, but an active shake to pounce
Yeah.
the feelings through my body, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. I
Yourself
did
in your
have
actual body.
Yeah, that's actually exactly right. Athletes do that as well, so you know as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and again, the reason is they've had the blood pumping so much, so they haven't had an emotional offset to energize an overflow of blood to the muscles. And again, fitness is actually induced stress through a physical form. They're volunteered, and what they're doing is they're increasing oxygen, increasing blood flow, increasing stress chemicals. So what is happening for them is instead of doing that static stretch, they're doing exactly what Abby says. They do what they call flick stretches, and they'll flick it out, and they're actually trying to move chemicals to actually come down on an actual warm down of their nervous system, because basically they're on. So fur therapy, animal therapy, horses, all of that. So what I do recommend is look into some nature and animal therapy. Start to get that toolbox. I know that you're getting toolbox as far as referral sheets and toolbox as far as who can I refer these people to. But the number one thing that we can do is create autonomy, voice and choice, and regulation practices that they have at their fingertips without having to refer them to a psychologist. That costs money, etc. Great. Sib's going, she's got 100 items in her toolkits. We've got go for drives. Oh my gosh, yes. Cass?
I think it's about having something like you said, at your fingertips, like something that you can access like in the moment. So if you are in that situation where you can't get out or you can't get away, then there's something that you can do in the moment, even if it's, not huge, but something small that you could just stand up and do.
Yes. So there is one particular way that they aim to do that. Brendan, I'll be 2 seconds. And that is that, and this is for all of us, because you might be on a bus. You will find it will happen out in public, in shopping centres. And it's simply that you've already got so much stimulation going on that you can't take any more. So generally it will happen not outside, inside the home, it'll happen outside. So one thing they ask is to look for a couple of things you can see. They go for sensory. What can you see? What can you smell? What can you touch? What can you hear? What they're actually trying to do is bring you back into your body, back into your nervous system, back into your senses. Because what happens is anxiety is where fear gets raised about a future concern. If you want to pull anxiety back, you've got to come back into your body and get into the present moment. And what will do that is sensory. So some people will have fidgets to touch. They'll look at color and name it. They'll smell something. You've got to come back into your body. Anxiety means you've gone into your head. You've gone into the future. Brendan, give us some of your great tips that we can all use.
Yeah, I was just about to say that, the 5 senses one.
Oh, tell us how you know that. Tell us.
So my partner uses that very regularly.
Okay.
Very, very regularly. She's very in touch with her mental health and when it's going bad.
Yeah.
And, I've learned over the few years that I've been with different coping strategies or supports where I'm needed, where I'm not.
Wow.
Certain times when I'm just there to listen, when I'm there to engage, whether it's a cold, like a cold face washer,
Oh, wow.
or
Sensory. Okay, so
Yeah.
using temperature, that's awesome, Brendan.
yes, that helps a lot.
Okay.
Kind of calming words,
Yeah.
reassurance. But yeah, the 5 things is one of the first ones that I learned
Yeah.
from
Is it?
her.
Okay.
And it helps so much. It really just
Yeah.
regulates anything that you're going through.
Yeah.
Even if it's for a temporary amount of time, it's usually a good circuit breaker.
I love
be
that
able to
word,
come back to
circuit
reality.
breaker.
Yeah,
I often say we need to put the pin back in the grenade, but I love the circuit breaker. It doesn't sound
yeah,
as
yeah.
savage.
Because I mean, it's already happened. You can't really put it
Yeah.
back in. But what you can do is
Yeah.
kind of have that moment and then move on from it. And more often than not, it does really help.
Night, Sid. And that's the thing, more often than not, it comes with regular practice. So the body remembers that it worked
Yeah, and
last
I
time.
think the
It's a
most
neural
important
pathway of, oh, this is what I do when I go to bed. I lay down, put head on a pillow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think the
Yep.
most important thing to remember is to practice your coping strategies before you actually get into that scenario. And I know, obviously, you can't predict what scenarios you're going to get into, but if you're able to at least be aware of them or put them into practice, like practice putting them into practice.
That's a great idea.
it's
Knowing
very
when you're going to need
difficult.
support in advance,
Yeah, like
prevention,
it's very
mental health.
difficult to
Yeah.
to do something for the first time in that moment. If you've read like a brochure, if you've read something about it,
Yeah.
the time to practice it or try it is not when you're in a crisis.
Yeah. That's
Which
true.
is another thing my partner's taught me.
Yeah.
Practice it when you're of sound mind or you're feeling great. So when you get to that point, for whatever
Yeah.
reason, you're actually able to access that, however distressed you may be,
Yeah.
or share it with someone, whether it's a family member or a partner, so they can assist you in getting to that point if they can't.
I like the sharing it with someone. So just so
Yeah.
you know as well, there's been a lot of education and science and looking into. I've got so many good things here they're writing in. I'll read them in a minute. Into the fact that what they know for sure is, sorry, I've just been put off by these, but I have to read them. They're too good. I've got to give someone else the voice. Hugh has written again, recommending about budgeting to reduce anxiety and financial issues. That is absolutely going to be something that is going to possibly be a support service for this client. As you know, sometimes through the control of money or even the lack of money in the home. Cass has got that she has a tiny ball in her bag. It's got a bell in it. Wow, that she rolls around in her hand. So that's really crazy. That's great. I love that. Again, sound. So we've got now to get to the next slide. And what we've got is we've got an activity research, and it's talking about what services are available. This is still on you because you're a big part of this. The stronger you are, the better that you're going to be able to continue to stay in this industry of mental health, because even though you might want to work directly in this particular field, many of the clients will have, and now we know how to recognize them, some life history here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to figure out how to work the breakout rooms properly, and we're going to then come back after a break. So we've had a really great session so far, and look at what services are available for domestic family violence that you can look into for personal development for yourself. So we're going to just see what we've got that could actually assist you to understand this client better. So how about I actually hit stop record? Why is this? For some reason it's not here. Okay, so what we'll do, everybody, let's have a 10-minute break. How does that sound? And what we'll do is we'll come back at 7:10. Got some thumbs up from some people. See you at 7:10. Go shake it off, and if you want, we can do the dance when you get back. See you soon. Okay, guys, welcome back, and thank you for your patience because I have been fiddling with the record. So what we're going to do is do a very quick look at the domestic family violence personal training that might exist. That way you could actually tack on these additional trainings to your current support work if you wanted to go into this field. So what I'm going to do is just do some breakout rooms, and we've got 4 of them created. I'm going to open up the rooms, and they look to be groups of 3. So if one of you would like to do some Googling and someone else can write some things down. So you may want to look at the areas that you're in as far as states. So and see if there's something local out of interest. Maybe even if the 3 of you have 3 different states, you might want to say, okay, well, let's look at something in each of our areas, or you may just have a particular interest in which type of domestic family violence type of development that you want to do. It might be that it's to do with the courts, or it might be to do with domestic family violence professional development that works with youth. So you choose. Please do something that's personal to you and beneficial to you, either near you, near your area, or near your interest. So we're going to just do probably no more than 10 minutes, 5 to 7. See how you go, and I'll call you back soon. And then we can all share some ways that we can actually get additional support through professional development. Welcome back, everybody. So I hope that was interesting and actually related to you. Please put your hand up. This is something we're all going for. I can see lots of mics off. So would anyone like to tell us what type of training or development that you found that you'd be interested in or available to you? Hugh, you want to give us something that you found?
I was just wondering,
Mhm.
what's stopping us as people who want to become specialists in mental health going and actually doing support courses that are offered for people who actually have mental health issues, or alcohol and drug issues, or just any type of issues. Like, we could learn a lot through doing one of those courses, couldn't we?
Absolutely. Did you find any courses when you did a Google that maybe worked on domestic family violence at any particular area?
Actually, so, well, possibly Berry Street does help with that. I'm not sure what they offer exactly, but Berry Street might help. And I actually Googled the wrong thing. I Googled drugs and alcohol.
That's okay. That's part of
So
the
yeah,
unfortunate side of
yeah.
this.
So there's this certificate for in alcohol and other drugs at Victoria University
Yep.
in Melbourne.
Yeah.
So
and again, this area of domestic family violence does lead towards being able to specialize in a particular scenario to support someone. And as that was been mentioned, it could be the courts, it could be drug and alcohol, it could be class. You could actually work with the children through schools. I've got Renee's got a hand up. Please contribute. Tell us something that you found that we could get as support for us through development.
Yeah, well, a certificate in childhood trauma.
Yes. Yep.
Course in that, just to understand trauma in childhood.
Beautiful. So work down when they're young and support the really young children. What course did you find? Was there anything specific?
Well, I found one, but it's in South Australia. It's like
Yeah.
University of South Australia online.
Okay. So we've got Abby Rose. What did you find?
Sorry, I was just reading it. The Diploma of Child, Youth and Family Intervention
Uh-huh.
through ACCS
Mm-hmm.
online, self-paced, 18 units, nationally recognized.
Beautiful. Karen, have you found something?
I found a really interesting one, which is the National Disability Service, domestic and family violence training resources for the disability workforce.
Wow.
So
Cool.
that's a course. It looks to be online.
Okay.
It's a number of modules. I don't know anything more about that. But yeah, it has how to accessing a DB service and stuff like that.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's actually a really good one for resources.
Fantastic. Cass, have you got something again? Your hand back up, or is that from last time?
Yeah, I've always got something to say.
Right.
So I found something on DV Alert, and it's a 2-day workshop.
Oh yeah, that's a good one too.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's a 2-day workshop, and I mean, when we spoke, the three of us were quite determined that we don't want to specialize in domestic violence. So
Yep.
but yeah, and then there was other things through Lifeline and 1-800-RESPECT, which is personal development and training as well. So it's not as formal.
Yep. And that's the thing, it doesn't have to always be formal, because you can do some training and development by volunteering some time, because you will be highly skilled and trained with this course. So they would absolutely, no doubt, enjoy having some of your skills. And again, it's a soft way to actually trial any industry, as you say, because it's not for everybody, Cass. It's some pretty tough cases. So let's keep going and we'll get through this stuff. What I'd like to really head towards is another quick thing is the mandatory reporting. It's actually in your knowledge questions. So if we can get to that today, we can try and nut it out a bit together and get some of your knowledge questions done. So let's keep moving with, we're needing to look at the economic context of this particular, I'm just going to move myself out of the way. And what we've got is the cost is in the billions. And the cost is to the victims, the survivors, but also to the community itself. So can anyone think of what areas would be costing on economics? What we've got, a large one. Karen's raised a hand. Yep.
Well, the court system.
Perfect. Court system.
Massive.
Our police, our welfare system, housing is incredibly big. And again, a lot of what we're discussing tonight,
Healthcare
guys, is in your knowledge questions. So hopefully we can get you ahead. Yes. So yes, we've got all of the services, is the cost to the community, and as well is the health, mental health and physical health. So what we've got to very quickly look at too is all the historical and political context, and there is changes of legislation, thank heavens. So laws are constantly getting in place. And we mentioned that previously it wasn't, it was actually not against the law to have violence in homes and with children as well. Community awareness is growing exponentially. It's on all forms of social media. It's through school training now. There's so much more awareness on every single industry. The perceptions, I think, are changing as well, because it previously used to be considered that maybe it was low socioeconomic, maybe it actually was people who couldn't stand up for themselves. It was seen as someone who actually was weak and vulnerable, not just in a vulnerable position. But I think the perceptions have changed, and now they're recognizing that this is very multifaceted. There are homes that are wealthy, a lot of finances, which Hugh pointed out, And I'm really glad you did, Hugh, because I have a friend in the police force, and if they do get a call out for domestic violence, he said there is a perception in the industry that you're going to go to maybe a smaller home of less wealth, and that he said that often they are pulling up to very wealthy homes. And he said if we see a lot of BMWs and flash cars, his heart sinks. And often the actual disagreement has started over finances. So that was a great point that Hugh brought up. Again, that shaken up Coke bottle. This is simply people, not simply, sorry. This is people who are living under a great deal of pressure, and they don't have the right coping mechanisms. So what is happening is the perception is that this isn't weak and vulnerable, it isn't poor people. And that is actually creating a lot more opportunity for hope and healing for people who suffer through this. So the triggers for change are there, and change is progressing. Very quickly, we've got to cover the legal and ethical considerations. So as you actually know, we always work with the rights and responsibilities. So the one major area here is looking at the rights and responsibilities as a worker. And that is that we do have the right and responsibility as far as not just the privacy and confidential, but we've got to stay in our lane. If we are working with people who have these particular challenges and behaviours, we don't all of a sudden start to address the alcohol as if we are already trained with the training that you saw. It is specialised. So we have responsibilities to stick to our job role. Again, as I have counselling and support work, I made sure that I never actually went across and started to do psychological work. So there's a right and responsibility to stick to our duties. Our work role boundaries, again, that's the same thing, but it actually does relate a little bit more to that we are making sure that we're remaining professional at all times, and that we are not becoming enmeshed or invested in them personally, and that we also are not socialising with our support clients. We have to have that friendly, not friend line in the sand. And this one's a hard one to do, actually. I have to be very honest and say, having worked with CPTSD, draws on your heartstrings, that boundary and holding that boundary. These are people who haven't known safety, genuine concern, respect. And when you do turn up to support them, when no one else is, there's a real attachment to you. So as a support worker, and again, you won't be having to work necessarily directly in family violence. They may have a history of it. And they actually very much do attach. You become their favourite support worker, and then it creates challenges there where for 6 months we tried 15 other support workers and she said no one's as good as you. You become what they call an FB, a favourite person. And that boundary is very, very challenging to hold. So just heads up there. They'll attach to your love, care and concern, and that one you'll need to keep in place. So as you know, you've got your duty of care, you've got your privacy, confidentiality and everything. So the duty of care actually revolves around everybody involved. So where we have to protect the safety, that safety is for anyone involved, and that includes yourself. And you are of equal status for priority of care. So in this particular case, because it generally involves several people and it's complex and involves organisations, that duty of care is extended to make sure that there is psychological safety and physical safety, and that has to be maintained for you because it does get compromised. We're talking about violence. The human rights is obviously about everybody having an opportunity to have dignity and respect. But again, with the human rights, as I had read before, it's about empowerment. So human rights, again, there's a boundary there. We've got to make sure that we give agency. These people have lost control. So we've got to make sure that those boundaries are kept and they have the rights to safety, they have the rights to a voice, they have a right to a choice. And that's where we really have to get that autonomy and get their life back in. And the only way we can do that is to walk beside them and make sure that we don't become advisors. It's very tricky because they're going to lean on you for some advice. That's a boundary and a duty of care and a human rights that comes. The discrimination is one big thing there, is making sure that we make certain that we are treating everybody equally. It's challenging because you're going to have quite a number of family situations that maybe you have biases against and opinions, and holding that unconditional positive regard and not having any discrimination against which clients are your favorites, and making sure that, again, it's a human rights. Everyone gets treated fairly and equally across the board. So I think someone's got a radio on. I'm not sure. Got that sorted? So these are tricky boundaries to keep. Obviously, there's strict record management, which you're doing with all your role plays, so I don't need to go over that with you. You've got your privacy and confidentiality and disclosure. And of course, making sure that you've got consent in all cases that when you are referring on. Now, what I'd like to do now is to help you use this time wisely to get ahead in your studies, because we've got mandatory reporting there. And mandatory reporting actually comes up in a graph in your knowledge questions. And I'll just show you, it's actually question 5. So don't think it's much because it cuts it off. But you've got quite a few charts to fill in. So if I can put you into some breakout rooms now, what I'd like to do is, what you're being asked of is, who is a mandatory reporter? And they've divided it up into the states of Australia. So I think, Marishilla, we've got, might just mute you. We've got to actually look at who is got to report, because it differs state to state drastically, actually, and also what must they report. So when you're a mandatory reporter in different states, not all is mandatory. And then they also have different abuse. So I'll give you one example. So in Australian Capital Territory, the ACT, the abuse and neglect that must be reported is any physical or sexual abuse. But that is the only mandatory by law that a mandatory reporter must actually get on the phone and make a call. As you know, mandatory reporting, it is not just if it is known abuse. Mandatory reporting means that you all must report, and if it's life-threatening, it's a 000 call. Or if you have suspicion, you just suspect that there is a chance that it's likely, not even happened yet, that puts you in the mandatory reporter. So what you've got to do is look up who would be a mandatory reporter in the different states. And I can tell you right now, the list for ACT is very long. It's a doctor, a dentist, a nurse, an enrolled nurse, a midwife, psychologist. So this is what your question 5 is going to ask you to do. It's looking at education. It's any person who's caring for a child at a centre or coordinating any home-based care. So family daycares, public servants. It's got any person who provides any service to any children, young or family. We've got an official visitor or a person who's in the course of the person's employment. Wow. So if you're employed at the centre, you get classified. And basically what happens now, if you go to New South Wales, they actually have the physical abuse. They have sexual abuse as well, must be mandated, must be reported by law. But in New South Wales, it is also emotional abuse must be reported and psychological abuse must be reported. So every state has a different abuse requirement and they have a different requirement for who is a mandatory reporter. So we're going to do the state soon, but I'll just tell you what's very interesting is that Northern Territory, I think it is, every single person above 18 is actually, here we go, who is a mandatory reporter. There is no big list like there was in the ACT. Straight out. Any person, that's it. Basically, any person who, and then you've got health practitioners who perform any kind of prescribed regulation. But in the Northern Territory, if you're 18, every single person in that state is classified. It's not job role specific. Cass, what have you got for us?
I was just going to ask where you're finding this information. Do you have, like, is there a specific site? Like, it sounds like you've got it all there.
Yes.
Do we have to go fishing for it, or are you going to give us a little bit of a nudge in the right direction?
Yes, so I can. So basically what we'll do is it actually has there is, the table can be found in so we can just Google it, but basically it's the government. It's simply just it's a publication resource, and it's just reporting child abuse. So what we'll do is we'll just simply put it in government reporting child abuse in Australia and see what comes up. But what we're going to do is, instead of Australia, I'm going to give you all states. So that way we can all then come back, bring what we found, get your pens going crazy, guys, and let's actually get some of your knowledge questions done. So we've currently got 4 rooms. We've done ACT. Let's actually, room 1's Mahalia and Renee. Could you please do Queensland? Heidi, Hugh and Karen, could you please do South Australia? That's room 2. Room 3, we've got Jess, Maricilla and Mel. Could you please do, gosh, Tasmania's crazy, Victoria? And room 4, we've got Abby Rose, Cass and Colin. Could you please do Western Australia? And then I'll fill in the gaps. So what we're going to do is need a good 10 minutes. I'll pull you out at 8 o'clock. And then what we'll do is we'll do some of this shared together and then have another short break. And then we'll finish it off, and then we're pretty much finished for the night. So I'm going to hit the rooms. It's 7:50. I'm going to bring you out at 8, and we'll just do a bit of this and have another breather. So here comes the rooms, and I'll stop recording. Who was in the group that was doing Queensland? Would you like to go first and let us know, in Queensland, who is a mandatory reporter and what must they report in Queensland? Who had Queensland?
Hi. I had Queensland.
Oh, okay, Renee.
Yeah, Mahalia can do that because I remember I missed it. So yeah.
Yeah. Mahalia?
So under the Child Protection Act of 1999, teachers, doctors, nurses, police with child protection responsibilities, people performing a child advocate function.
Yep.
And early childhood education and care professionals were responsible for reporting.
So get your pens writing that all down. And the other one onto that is schools, any school staff. So you've got teachers, but the minute you're in a school employment, you go under their umbrella. So now what has got to be reported in Queensland? Did they actually?
More just any signs or suspicions.
So yeah, exactly. So when you say signs or suspicion, so they actually have it repeated a couple of times. They have it in 3 ways. It says has a reasonable suspicion. They've written that twice, or an awareness. So they really want to report at the just an awareness level. So every state is different too as to how quickly they'd like you to actually report. But Queensland is having any awareness, and that is that a child is suffering, and basically they have any significant harm. So they're just putting a blanket across all of them. They're not labeling it that it has to be sexual abuse or physical abuse. They're saying that so basically it is classified as any significant harm. And then, but basically they do put down obviously the other abuses such as physical or sexual. But they keep repeating if it is likely to. So in your area there for the Queensland, under what's reported is reasonable suspicions, an awareness, or a likelihood of. So our next that we had, anyone else want to volunteer? We had Victoria. What have we got from Victoria?
I can do Victoria.
Thanks, Jess.
So in Victoria, there's doctors or registered medical practitioners, police, school principals, teachers, school counsellors, nurses, midwives, and out-of-home care workers.
Yep.
And to report, you need to have a reasonable belief that a sexual offence or sexual misconduct or physical violence has happened in the presence of a child, behaviour causing significant emotional, physical harm to a child, or significant neglect to a child.
Yeah, and they have that a reasonable belief, and then they've written it in another way as well, belief on reasonable grounds. So for some reason, Victoria needs you to be reasonable. So it's interesting how if you look at what you have to report, the other is just a suspicion, and then you've got reasonable grounds. And then so as to what needs to be reported or is mandatory is the physical injury, sexual abuse, or sexual offence. So they're very specific about what is mandated. So who else have we got to come in on this? Hugh, what group were you with?
The South Australia group.
Which person in your group wants to have a chat and tell us about South Australia?
I can.
Yeah.
So I don't want to throw you under the bus every time, Hugh.
Right. Sorry. Are you waiting for me?
Yep. So who is doing South Australia?
I will.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So mandatory reporters are they're listed under Section 30 of the Children and Young People Safety Act 2017. They are prescribed health practitioners, medical practitioners, pharmacists, registered or enrolled nurses, dentists, and psychologists, police officers, community corrections officers, social workers, ministers of religion, employees of or volunteers in an organisation formed for religious or spiritual purposes. I'm getting confused. Are these the perpetrators?
No, you're spot on. No, that's who's mandatory. So as you've seen in
they are mandatory reporters, yes.
Yeah. So as you've seen in some, it's just the police, but here straight away we've actually got correctional officers. So it's a
teachers.
Yeah, we've got dentists in this state. You mentioned psychologists.
Yep. Community corrections officers, social workers, ministers of religion, and employees of religious institutions, teachers and employees of educational institutions.
Yes.
And officer or employee of a prescribed organisation. Who holds a management position.
As you mentioned, you had dentists, and they also have pharmacists.
Yes.
Yeah. So
pharmacists, registered or enrolled nurses.
Now, what types of abuse are those people, correctional officers and dentists and that in South Australia, what types of abuse are they mandated to report? Does it have
I had difficulty finding this.
Okay.
Section
got-
18.
We were looking specifically at child protection
Yep,
duties.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
I also found outside of that, Section 18 defines a child or young person is at risk if.
Yep.
So is that basically the that's what we have to report, isn't it?
Yes. So what they've got in South Australia is they've got the physical abuse and sexual abuse, which is what we found was in the other states. That was ACT, and it stopped there. And then New South Wales was physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional and psychological.
Yep.
And then what we've got South Australia, again, it goes broader as a state. It's mandated for physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, psychological, and then they've actually made it mandated for neglect. So they
where is that? I
when,
haven't been able to find that anywhere.
that's okay. This particular knowledge question 5 does give you the link, and then you can fill in all the missing bits. What's just interesting to know that every state has very specific requirements. So we're missing a state though. Who was our last state? Was it Western Australia or Tassie?
New South Wales.
New South Wales hasn't really been done. Yep.
And WA.
Who else was in the group that needs to come back to us? Mel?
No,
We had WA.
We did Victoria, but WA hasn't been done.
Yeah, we did WA.
Who did WA?
Myself, Abby Rose, and Colin.
Okay.
I'll dub us all in. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, let us know the differences if you can as well. Go for it.
All right. Well, I don't know the actual what needed to be reported because we didn't get that far.
That's okay.
Departmental officers of the Department of Communities. I don't know what that is. Doctors, ministers of religion, nurses and midwives, out-of-home care workers, police officers, psychologists, school counsellors, teachers, including TAFE lecturers. But I don't know what, what the criteria is for reporting.
So, and then we've got family counsellors as well. So they actually get very similar to the others. That is that they have physical abuse, sexual abuse, and they have the psychological harm. So it's interesting that they haven't written down the emotional and psychological like the other states. They've just gone psychological harm. And then they actually have neglect there as well. So in that state, there's quite a lot. Regardless, though, as you know, as workers, mandated workers, a lot of notes will need to go into your case file notes. And we've discussed what you're looking for. You came up with some amazing suggestions that these might be people who maybe were having trouble getting well dressed and caring for themselves, had low self-esteem. We're going to discuss a lot more of that in the other weeks for here. But what you know as well is that you would be keeping notes, you'd be chatting to your supervisor at any time that you feel there's suspicion. And it doesn't have to just stick to the rules as far as what they've mandated. You wouldn't say, oh, they're not asking me for any more than physical or sexual abuse, so I won't report. Ethically, you would, but it's just that you're not bound by law outside of this actual mandate, but you would definitely still report even if it was you were in that state and it wasn't in that list. If abuse is abuse, and you would report, but it's just nice to know what's your legal obligation. And that way also you've been able to help yourselves a little bit with some research for your knowledge questions. So we're nearly there, guys, because it's been a big session. So we've got some myths or facts, and they've got down that violence affects few women in Australia, and that actually is a myth. Most people committing violence are under the influence of drugs and alcohol. That's a myth as well. So it's not always related to. Unfortunately, for some people suffering the abuse, they may actually use drugs and alcohol as a means to regulate themselves or distract themselves, but that doesn't actually relate directly to domestic family violence. Users of violence are mentally ill. That's actually incorrect. Anyone who is challenged with mental health is not considered more violent at all. The last one, though, is actually a fact that stress and anger actually lead to violence. And that's what we were discussing as well about ways to regulate yourself. So one thing that's interesting to know as well, we were talking about how to bring yourself back to your body. If you are feeling dysregulated, or someone that you're supporting with mental health is, giving a name to what the sensation or feeling or emotion that you're having can arrest it as quickly as what we discussed, which was the sensory thing. What can you smell? What can you hear? What can you see? And it brings you back to your body. They've done a lot of scientific research. And if you can ask the person you're supporting, can you give me a name for what you are feeling, or even use the word experiencing? That way you're not trying to get them to open up to someone they don't trust. You can say, what's happening for you right now? Can you give me a label? Giving the sensation a name almost puts the brakes on. It gives it a way for them to ground it. And then you've got something else to discuss other than the behavior. So what you've got an opportunity to do then is let them have some control. Go for it, Karen.
Do you mean like giving it a name like David?
Sorry, that's cute. That's funny. Yeah. No, I like
So
that.
that's what I would call it personally,
makes
but
sense, actually, because it takes it outside of themselves. Name the feeling or emotion. So
okay, so
you can actually say, and it'll be in their language, that they're feeling stressed, and then you can actually then jump off from that and say, okay, where is that in your body? If you can bring it from their head and get them to focus their attention on what is happening, they gain physical control. If they can gain physical control, they can gain emotional control, and they can gain regulation. It's just like a little ladder down the steps. So what happens is you've got to let them identify it for themselves, and then they know it's outside of them as well. So all emotions come with information. So what you can ask them is, okay, you've told me that it's anger that's with you right now. So what information are you getting? What do you need? So often some people, it could be that their blood sugar's low and that they're needing to eat, they're needing space, they're needing to talk. There's a need with every emotion, and unfortunately there's a lot of dysregulation for people who are experiencing abuse. If you can't use the sensory, you can ask them to name it, to tame it, and then you can help. So it's just another tool of being able to actually get them to gain some self-mastery over their emotional state. And it takes it a little bit outside of them, but it also brings it back to them as well, because you're going to ask them, okay, that's great. Where in your body can you feel that rage? And then they're actually locating it. And then you can ask them, okay, what's happening for it right now? If you had to give it a number, what would the number be? And give them some control over their body. So that's just a sidetrack. But I like the name David, though. What would you call that episode that's happening? But that was the researching myths. We're not going to do any more researching. I'm not going to get you to watch this domestic violence video. I think we're done, but we're up to our summary, because we've really hung in there well tonight, guys. We've discussed the work practices, what type of work we'll be doing, for who we'll be doing, the values that we'll be upholding whilst we're doing the work, and the support processes as far as how we can be supported as well. Therefore, we can support them best, and how we can also do some support regarding that priority one being safety. And then that led us into the other priority for safety is all your legal and ethical, making sure. And I'm up to final questions. Is there anything that anyone would like some clarification around that we talked about tonight? Cass?
So mandatory reporting, it's not just about children, is it?
No, it's not actually.
No.
So, yes. So it is about a child or person.
Yeah, God, just because we had the focus on children, yeah, that's not what I had in my head, was not just children. It's obviously in any situation.
You're right. So if we, again, if we're working with any client that we feel that they may come to harm or harm someone else, that's when we actually breach that confidentiality as well and report.
And that's your duty of care.
That's yes. So if any person who we have reasonable suspicion, any of the words that you saw, so it's not a definite thing, because what we've got to recognize is that the investigators follow through. It doesn't have to have happened. It is possibly, likely, could happen. So we must report reasonably quickly at a suspicion of likelihood to any individual. The reason, unfortunately, so much comes up about child abuse is that they are in that list of vulnerable people, which is why the schools and the family daycares and then school counsellors and midwives are involved. Because as you know, we're looking at the vulnerable people that we're working with. It's where there is an imbalance of power. And I don't think you'll get any bigger imbalance of power than maybe a small baby than to an adult. So unfortunately, they are sufferers of this abuse, and therefore that's why so many mandatory reporters, and there's such a big focus on the child abuse, is simply that the shift of power is so big in that area. Well, you've managed to go really well. We did talk about having a dance off and a bit of a song to shake it off. So anyone who wants to hang back tonight, I've got a really good song to do. And if you want to get your song ready for next week, we're definitely going to go off record. I'd like to say good night to everybody who's been with us virtually and watching this as a recording. And I hope you get in and do some of the research like everyone else did. And so I'm going to say good evening and stop the recording.